Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're diving into one of the absolute most dramatic transformations in modern history. We're talking about how a tightly controlled, kind of underdog collection of British colonies somehow defied all the odds to forge an entirely new, independent nation. It wasn't just a simple political shift, it was a radical, earth-shattering break from a literal global superpower. So you really have to wonder, how did a group of supposedly loyal colonies actually defeat a global empire? It's a bit of a puzzle, right? Like, how does a seemingly stable, actually functioning relationship with Great Britain completely dissolve into a full-blown revolutionary war? Well, as you'll see, it wasn't some overnight thing. It was this gradual, steady erosion of trust, followed by a massive rise in frustration. To really understand the fracture, we gotta start at the very foundation. Which brings us to part one, the 13 British colonies. Okay, picture this. It's the 1600s, and large numbers of Europeans are making that huge, dangerous trek across the ocean to settle in North America. They end up establishing 13 very distinct colonies right along the eastern coast. But, and this is crucial, make absolutely no mistake about who was actually calling the shots. These settlements were unequivocally ruled by the British king. The colonists, they were British subjects, just living on new land, but completely under the exact same crown. Now, at first, this whole setup was actually a real win-win. It was highly mutually beneficial. The colonists were pretty happy, honestly, because Great Britain provided vital military protection and these incredibly robust trade networks. But, as you might guess, over time, that early harmony, it was completely replaced by deep resentment. And this was fueled by some ridiculously heavy taxes. And here's the kicker, absolutely zero political representation. So what on earth triggered this massive shift? Let's look at part two. The cost of war. The real catalyst for that massive shift was the harsh, expensive reality of conflict. Basically, the French and Indian War was massively costly. It completely drained the royal coffers, leaving the British government dealing with a severe financial crisis. So, what was their grand solution? Well, they decided the colonists across the ocean should be the ones to foot the bill. Right, so to raise all this much-needed cash, Parliament starts levying these incredibly heavy taxes directly on the colonies. And we're not just talking about taxing fancy luxury items here. No, they targeted everyday, basic necessities. Things like tea, paper, you name it. Imagine the basic items you literally use every single day suddenly skyrocketing in cost, just so you can pay off some foreign government's war debts. You'd be pretty mad, right? That brings us to part three, protests and punishments. Naturally, the inevitable reaction here was intense protest. But listen, the colonist anger wasn't purely about the money leaving their pockets. There was a much deeper structural issue at play. They had absolutely zero representatives in the British Parliament. None. They had no voice in the government that was heavily taxing them. This exact frustration birthed what is probably one of the most famous rallying cries in all of history: no taxation without representation. It wasn't just, hey, don't tax us. It was more like, don't tax us if we don't even have a seat at the table. And wow, the escalation from that catchy slogan to actual physical war was remarkably rapid. Things really boiled over in 1773 with the Boston Tea Party, where colonists literally dumped boxes of British teas straight into the harbor. And Britain's response? They definitely didn't back down. Instead, they retaliated by passing even stricter, punishing laws. Tensions just skyrocketed until they hit a breaking point. Words turned into physical violence, fighting broke out between armed British soldiers and colonial militias, and the relationship was officially broken. Moving on to part four, declaring American independence. So, with blood officially spilled in open combat, there was simply no going back. In 1776, key leaders, we're talking legendary figures like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, they finally took decisive action. They were totally done protesting. Instead, they stepped up and formally declared independence. Now, that bold declaration officially ignited the American Revolutionary War. And let me tell you, it was definitely not a quick or easy fight. But after years of grueling battle against a literal global superpower, the colonies achieved the impossible. In 1783, they actually won their freedom. So, looking back at the entire arc of our explainer today, it's just an incredible journey. It started in the 1600s with European settlement under strict British rule. Then, a mutually beneficial setup turned completely sour over taxes and a lack of representation.
It erupts in 1773, escalates to that famous 1776 declaration, and finally culminates in freedom in 1783. Talk about a complete metamorphosis. Think about it. The colonists were willing to take on the most powerful empire in the entire world, endure years of brutal war, and risk absolutely everything, all fundamentally because they demanded to have a voice in their own government. They flat out refused to be taxed and ruled without representation. So, looking at their incredible sacrifice, how do we value and utilize that exact same representation in our own lives today? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those big questions.